The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Judge Malcolm Royce peered down at the defendant's table, his expression twisted in a sneer. Seated there was Ethan Carter, an 18-year-old kid. Too young, too fresh-faced, too out of place in a courtroom where real battles were fought. Judge Royce leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel against the desk as he scanned the room. "What is this, a joke?" he scoffed. "Who let a kid into my courtroom?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor smirked, a few jury members chuckled, and even the bailiff shook his head, amused. Ethan, however, remained calm. No nervous shifting, no flinching. Instead, he flipped open a thick leather-bound legal binder, skimming a page with absolute focus. Judge Royce chuckled, shaking his head. "Let me guess," he continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "You learned the law from watching TV?" The courtroom erupted in full-blown laughter, except for one person. Ethan. Finally, he looked up, his calm, unreadable gaze locking onto the judge. Then, he spoke. "Actually, Your Honor, I learned the law from graduating Harvard, at 16. The laughter cut off. Judge Royce's face froze. Judge Royce leaned forward, his smirk widening as if he had just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. "Nice try, kid. Where's your real attorney?" The courtroom fell into silence. A few jurors exchanged amused glances, while the court reporter looked up from her notes, raising an eyebrow. At the prosecution's table, Robert Klein, a seasoned attorney with over 20 years of experience, let out a low chuckle. He was known for dismantling defense lawyers, and this kid didn't even have one. Ethan, however, didn't flinch. He folded his hands neatly, keeping his posture straight and confident. "I'm representing myself." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Royce blinked once, clearly caught off guard before he scoffed. "You're joking." Ethan remained calm and unreadable. "No, Your Honor." Klein smirked, shaking his head as if this were all one big joke. "This will be fun," he taunted. "I'll try to go easy on you." The gallery snickered, and even the bailiff let out an amused huff. Judge Royce rolled his eyes, tapping his gavel against the bench. "All right, let's get this over with." 3 weeks ago, Ethan had been working on a cybersecurity research paper when he heard a loud crash at his front door. Boom! Before he could react, heavily armed FBI agents stormed his home. "Hands up!" an agent barked, his gun trained directly at Ethan. "Step away from the computer." Confused, Ethan slowly raised his hands, his mind already racing through possibilities. One agent roughly grabbed him, slamming him against the wall before locking his wrists in tight handcuffs. As he was dragged outside, a question burned in his mind. "What am I being charged with?" One of the agents scoffed. "Like you don't know." The answer came soon enough. Ethan was being accused of hacking into Titan Corp, one of the biggest tech conglomerates in the world. The charges? Stealing millions of dollars in trade secrets, deleting critical data, illegally transferring money to offshore accounts. It all sounded damning. There was just one problem. Ethan didn't do it. Someone had framed him. As soon as he saw the so-called evidence against him, Ethan knew something was off. The timestamps didn't match his actual activity. The hacking signature was sloppily forged. Certain data logs had deliberate gaps, left by someone trying to make it seem real. A good lawyer could fight the case, but a great lawyer wouldn't just fight it. They would prove who really did it. Ethan had never lost a game of chess in his life, and this was just another game. Prosecutor Robert Klein adjusted his tie, standing confidently before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, gesturing to a large screen that lit up with lines of code, bank transfers, and timestamps. "The evidence against Mr. Carter is overwhelming. Not only was his personal IP address linked to the Titan Corp breach, but we have transaction records proving he moved stolen funds to an offshore account. This is an open and shut case." He turned toward Ethan, flashing a condescending smirk. "Unless, of course, the defendant has some magic trick to explain away the facts." The courtroom chuckled again. The judge smirked, shaking his head. This was too easy. Ethan, however, remained unfazed. He casually flipped a few pages in his legal binder, scanning them for a moment before looking up. "Objection, Your Honor." The room stilled. Judge Royce arched an eyebrow, barely hiding his amusement. On what grounds? Ethan tapped his fingers against the table, his voice calm and calculated. That evidence was obtained illegally. The prosecution's entire case relies on a forensic data extraction conducted without a proper warrant. Under the Fourth Amendment, any evidence obtained unlawfully is inadmissible in court. A wave of murmurs rippled through the jury box. Judge Royce let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, really?" he said, his tone mocking. "And what makes you think that?" Without breaking eye contact, Ethan reached into his binder and pulled out a printed document. The search warrant submitted by the FBI was time-stamped at 7:12 a.m., but according to the forensics report, they had already begun extracting data from my system at 6:45 a.m., before the warrant was even signed. A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge's smirk faltered. The prosecutor's brow furrowed. That wasn't supposed to happen. Klein quickly recovered, shaking his head. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. A minor discrepancy in timestamps." "Not a minor discrepancy," Ethan cut in smoothly. "A constitutional violation, and per Map v. Ohio, illegally obtained evidence is inadmissible in court." Gasps echoed through the room. A few jurors exchanged glances, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. Judge Royce, now slightly less amused, sighed. "Fine. Proceed." Ethan turned to the witness stand, where Detective Marcus Graves, the lead investigator, sat. "Detective, when did you obtain the forensic logs from my computer?" "May 5th, the detective said firmly. Ethan tilted his head. "Are you sure?" "Positive." Ethan nodded, flipping another page in his binder. "That's interesting," he said, pausing for effect. "Because Titan Corp wasn't breached until May 7th. A sharp silence filled the room. Detective Graves shifted in his seat. Judge Royce leaned forward. The jury? They were starting to see it. This wasn't just some kid. Something was very, very wrong with this case. A heavy silence hung in the courtroom. Detective Marcus Graves shifted in his seat, his face suddenly pale. "May 5th, he repeated, but this time there was hesitation in his voice. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands neatly on the table. "Interesting," he mused, his voice dripping with controlled confidence. "Because Titan Corp wasn't breached until May 7th. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The jurors sat up straighter, whispering amongst themselves. The court reporter paused, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Even Judge Royce's jaw tightened. Klein, the prosecutor, immediately stood up, his smug demeanor crumbling. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is trying to mislead the court." Ethan tilted his head. "Mislead?" he repeated, flipping open another page in his thick binder. "I'm just stating the facts. The breach occurred on May 7th. That's when Titan Corp's servers flagged the intrusion." He slid a document onto the evidence table. "This is the company's official cybersecurity report. It explicitly states that no unauthorized access occurred before that date." Judge Royce glanced at the document, then at the prosecutor, then back at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, are you implying that Detective Graves provided false testimony?" Ethan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Oh no. I'm not implying anything. I'm saying it outright." Another wave of murmurs erupted through the courtroom. The detective swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. Judge Royce, for the first time since this trial began, looked less amused. His fingers tightened around his gavel. This was not how today was supposed to go. From the moment Ethan Carter had walked in, Royce had been sure this trial was nothing more than a ridiculous spectacle. But now, the entire courtroom was hanging on to the words of an 18-year-old. And worst of all, he was right. Ethan sat forward, staring directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to move for an immediate dismissal." The room fell silent. Klein's head snapped toward the judge. "This is outrageous," he barked. "We have evidence." "No, you don't." Ethan cut him off smoothly. "You had illegally obtained data and false testimony from an unreliable witness. That means this case isn't just weak, it's non-existent." Judge Royce's gavel trembled in his grip. For the first time, the judge wasn't smirking. For the first time, he looked nervous. He glanced at Klein, who was fumbling for words. Then, he looked at Ethan. The kid wasn't smiling, he wasn't gloating, he was calm, composed, and in complete control. And Judge Royce realized something chilling. He had completely underestimated him. Bang! Bang! Judge Royce slammed his gavel down, his face burning red. Enough! You're just a kid, you can't… Ethan barely flinched. Instead, he calmly reached into his legal binder, pulled out a thick folder, and slid it onto the judge's desk. The impact echoed through the silent courtroom. Ethan's voice was cool, unwavering. Actually, Your Honor, I can. And here's the proof. Judge Royce's lips parted slightly, as if for the first time he wasn't sure what to say. The prosecutor stiffened. The detective looked like he wanted to disappear. Ethan turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been told that I hacked into Titan Corp's servers, that I stole data, that I transferred funds. But I'm about to show you something that changes everything. He flipped open the folder, revealing pages upon pages of forensic data, timestamps, and server logs. The jury leaned forward. Judge Royce frowned, his fingers tightening on the gavel. What am I looking at? Ethan pointed to a particular log entry. The real culprit. Prosecutor Klein let out a dry laugh. Oh, come on. You expect us to believe… This isn't about belief, Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. This is about facts. He turned toward the screen as his laptop mirrored onto the courtroom projector. The display lit up with a name. The entire room collectively gasped. Judge Royce froze. Prosecutor Klein went pale. Detective Graves looked like he might faint. Because the real hacker was sitting in that very courtroom. Klein jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly… Silence! Judge Royce roared, but his voice wavered. Ethan turned toward the jury, keeping his tone measured and controlled. What you see here is an internal system log from Titan Corp. This particular entry, highlighted in red, shows who really accessed the servers. He pointed. And it wasn't me. The gallery exploded in shocked whispers. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Klein was furious, flipping through his own paperwork, but he had nothing. The detective? Completely silent. Judge Royce, for the first time all trial, was sweating. Ethan stepped back, letting the weight of the evidence sink in. Then calmly, he spoke his final blow. I move for an immediate dismissal and an investigation into everyone who helped frame me. The judge didn't move. His hands trembled. The prosecutor lowered his head. And for the first time in his entire career, Judge Royce had completely lost control of his own courtroom. Judge Royce sat back in his chair, his once arrogant demeanor crumbling into something unrecognizable: disbelief. His fingers twitched around the gavel, his mind scrambling for a way out. This is impossible. Ethan tilted his head slightly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Not impossible, just the law. The jury sat in stunned silence. The gallery whispered furiously. Detective Graves had his head down, avoiding eye contact. Prosecutor Klein, looking pale and shaken, slowly rose from his chair. With an audible gulp, he turned to Judge Royce. Your Honor. He hesitated, glancing back at Ethan, then at the jury. The prosecution moves to drop all charges. A sharp gasp filled the courtroom. Judge Royce's gavel remained still. His authority, his control. Ethan had taken all of it. A legal prodigy had just walked into his courtroom and obliterated an entire case. For most defendants, that would have been enough. Winning was the goal. But Ethan? Ethan had one more move left. He picked up his binder, snapping it shut with a crisp sound before standing up. Before we adjourn, Your Honor, he said smoothly, his voice carrying through the room. Would you like to see my actual law license? Silence. The air in the courtroom shifted. Judge Royce's expression hardened. What? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan reached into his bag. All eyes were on him. The jury, the judge, the prosecutor, the spectators. Slowly, he pulled out a document in a sleek protective folder. He turned it, holding it up for the judge to see. His official bar certification. The gasps came like a tidal wave. A fully licensed attorney, at 18 years old. Judge Royce gripped the edge of his desk. The prosecutor sank back into his chair. The jury? Mouths hanging open. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Judge Royce stared at the document, unable to move, unable to process what just happened. Ethan had never been some cocky, clueless kid. He had been a wolf in sheep's clothing, walking into a courtroom of doubters and shredding their entire system apart. Ethan placed the certificate down on the judge's bench, smiling. "Next time," he said, "don't judge a book by its cover." He turned and walked out. Behind him, the legal world would never be the same. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief. The once mocking murmurs of the audience had turned into awe-stricken whispers. Ethan calmly gathered his things, snapping his binder shut with the same precision he had used to dismantle the prosecution's case. Judge Royce sat motionless, his lips slightly parted, but no words came out. A judge, speechless. This had never happened before. Ethan adjusted his tie, then looked straight at Royce, his expression unreadable. "Next time," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "Don't judge a book by its cover, Your Honor." The jury exchanged stunned glances. The prosecutor buried his face in his hands. Detective Graves? Completely frozen, his career hanging by a thread. Ethan turned and strode toward the courtroom doors. With every step, it became clearer. This wasn't just a win. This was a reckoning. As Ethan reached the exit, the heavy doors swung open, straight into a flood of flashing cameras. Reporters shoved microphones forward. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to win against the prosecution? How did you pull this off? Were you always planning to expose them like this?" Ethan stopped, glanced at the cameras, then smirked. "Feels like justice." The reporters scrambled for more questions, but Ethan didn't linger. He had made his point. He walked past them, down the courthouse steps, untouchable, unstoppable. Back inside the courtroom, Judge Royce sat stiffly, staring blankly ahead. His fingers trembled against the desk. He had mocked Ethan, ridiculed him, thought he was nothing. Now he had to sit with the fact that he had just been played by an 18-year-old. A few jurors stole glances at him, some smirking, others shaking their heads. He had lost his courtroom. And worst of all, he knew that, outside these walls, the world would know it too. As Ethan disappeared into the crowd outside, the legal world erupted. The case? Instantly viral. Social media flooded with reactions. "Teen genius exposes corrupt system live in court." Judge Royce humiliated, laughed at the wrong person. Ethan Carter, the young lawyer who just destroyed the prosecution. Judge Royce? He sat alone in his chamber, staring at the headlines, knowing he would never live this down, because no matter what happened next, the world had already chosen a new legal powerhouse. And his name? Ethan Carter. The moment Ethan Carter stepped out of the courthouse, the case exploded into a national phenomenon. Within hours, news outlets across the country picked up the story. The headlines were brutal. "Teen genius destroys corrupt court." Judge Royce humiliated after mocking 18-year-old attorney. "Legal prodigy proves the system is broken, and he's here to fix it." Clips from the courtroom spread like wildfire. Ethan sliding his law license onto the judge's bench, the moment he exposed the real hacker. Judge Royce's stunned silence. The public reaction? Fury. Admiration. Shock. Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube erupted with memes and discussions. This kid just walked into court and embarrassed everyone in 30 minutes. Judge Royce really thought he was in control. LMAO. Ethan Carter just proved why underestimating someone is the dumbest mistake ever. Even high-profile lawyers and celebrities weighed in. This young man is a once-in-a-generation mind. The legal field just changed forever. Prominent defense attorney. Ethan Carter. Remember the name. Investigative journalist. I want this guy on my team. Fortune 500 CEO. As Ethan's name soared, Judge Royce's reputation crumbled. A formal judicial review was launched. Critics pointed out his arrogance, bias, and unprofessional conduct. Law professors analyzed the case on TV, picking apart every mistake the judge and prosecution made. People demanded Royce be removed from the bench. A petition for his resignation gained over 500,000 signatures overnight. Judge Royce had spent decades ruling a courtroom like a king. Now, he was facing public humiliation on a global scale. As the media scrambled to get interviews with him, Ethan's inbox overflowed with job offers. Top law firms wanted to hire him, on the spot. Major universities offered him faculty positions. Tech billionaires wanted him as their personal legal counsel. His name was suddenly worth millions. But Ethan? He turned them all down. Because he had bigger plans. In a rare interview, Ethan finally spoke about his future. "I appreciate the offers," he said. "But I'm not interested in defending the rich. I'm interested in fixing a broken system." He revealed his plan, launching a legal defense group to fight corruption, helping innocent people wrongly accused, like he had been, exposing more corrupt officials, lawyers, and corporations. Ethan wasn't just here to win one case. He was here to change the system forever. And this was just the beginning. The world had been watching. And Ethan Carter? He wasn't about to let this moment go to waste. A week after his explosive courtroom victory, Ethan stood at a podium, facing a crowd of reporters, law students, and activists. The cameras flashed wildly. The media leaned forward, eager to hear what he had to say. Ethan cleared his throat, then spoke. "I've been offered jobs at the biggest law firms in the country." The crowd murmured. Everyone knew this was true. "I've been given blank checks to work for billionaires." More murmurs. "But I didn't walk into that courtroom just to win a case." A hush fell over the audience. Ethan's voice hardened. "I walked in to prove something. The system is broken. It doesn't protect people. It protects those in power." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "So, I'm starting my own firm. One that fights injustice at every level. One that takes cases no one else will touch. No corruption, no bias, no rich men buying their way out of trouble. A firm that puts truth first." The crowd erupted. Across town, in a dimly lit office, Judge Malcolm Royce sat alone, watching Ethan's speech on the news. His hands were clenched into fists. His jaw was tight. The arrogance, the smirking confidence he once carried? Gone. He had thought Ethan was just a cocky kid. A joke. Now he realized he had underestimated the wrong person. Ethan Carter wasn't just a genius. He was a force that couldn't be stopped. And worse, he wasn't just coming for corrupt cases. He was coming for people like Royce. Back at the press conference, Ethan finished his speech. "I know what it's like to be wrongly accused. I know what it's like to be underestimated." He looked straight into the cameras. "So to every person who has ever been silenced, mistreated, or ignored by the system, know this. You won't be fighting alone anymore." He turned from the podium, walking away as reporters shouted questions. But Ethan? He had already moved on to the next battle, because this wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning.